All right, evening, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good one. Welcome to another show. I know I haven't done one in a while. I have been taking some time off. But anyway, I'm back, and unfortunately, for some, fortunately for others, this isn't a Darth Dawkins centered review, and it's not going to be a J. Robin one. I'm mixing it up a little bit and reviewing some Matt Slick activity over on Clubhouse. As the description has it, he had a conversation about LGBTQ issues. And Matt Slick is not, I don't know what, I was going to say he's not woke. That really doesn't do anything about that. His views on LGBTQ issues are basically straight out of like the mid 50s. 1650s maybe. Actually, they might have been a little bit more progressive. But anyway, we're going to jump into this one a little bit. It's a little bit longer, so I'm going to play this in some larger chunks. But a lot of this is between Matt Slick and a Clubhouse user named Billy Martin. And what I've listened to most of this. I've seen the bulk of it. I saw it when it first came out, and what really kind of like got my attention was how much hyperventilating Matt Slick is doing. And in all seriousness, sometimes these conversations can get a little fraught. People can get upset. I mean, it can happen. But Matt Slick is like, I don't know if he's in the middle of eating something or something, but he's doing a lot of heavy breathing and he's getting very, very worked up over this topic. And I don't entirely, given some of the like ideas he expresses, I'm not exactly sure why. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit. Naturally, I'm going to psychologize and speculate wildly, but hey, you know, it's what we do here. So let me bring that up here. So here we go. And I'm going to say hello to everybody in the live chat. Randolph Richardson, good to see you. God equals the square root of -1. Michael Deaton, his shadow, secular pagan mom, good to see you. Stephen M. Holy, AJ Hib, good to see you. Kyle Ferguson, Space Lord of 75. Jenna, BFA, hello all, and good evening, Jefferson. Hey, Jenna, nice to see you. Thanks for showing up. Jack Burton, always good to see you. Jody Wheeler, how are you doing? Jim Farcry, or Forcry, sorry, Hemp Racer. Messing around, Skylar Witness. Witness? I don't know what I'm doing with that. Anyway, so yeah, hello everybody, and I apologize if I don't get to everybody's names during the course of this whole thing. But I did see Red Fang just showed up. Hey, Red Fang, how's it going? So we're going to jump into this now. Same rules apply as usual. If you can't hear anything, if sound is going wonky, start yelling at me in the side chat. We're going to get going, and I don't. We'll see how this one goes. I'm hoping this one's going to turn out to be kind of interesting. I remember having quite a few thoughts when I first heard this, but it's been a minute. So here we go.
Are you going to defend to me that things happen for no reason?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's almost undeniable.
Blue! You're good? Okay, no, all right. Things are happening for no reason, excuse me. Tomate gato. Start grass green. Oh my goodness, look at that paint. A lot of no reason things are occurring in here, right?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, that Tom Rabbit actually has a video on that. This was like a little routine that he and Mr. Batman did to somebody in order to illustrate, like, I guess the kind of world we would expect to have without a god would be one where people talk like this, which doesn't make any sense because if his worldview was true and there was no god, there would be no people to talk like that. So, sorry, Matt.
Now, you see, I asked a question.
And that was just an intro from that previous one. So I got to thank Daz for that one. Okay, so here we go. So in the room already, Matt Slick's up there in the middle, Benna, Jeff, Jack, Daz, who's actually runs this particular channel, and the Clubhouse one. I'm pulling this one from Billy Martin is in the lower right corner, JJ, and then Jane. So I'm not exactly sure whose channel this was on, because I don't see any of the mods in there, but yeah, we'll see what happens.
You guys aren't used to being cross-examined.
No, I said.
So I can
depends on your.
You see the difficulty.
Depends on your belief system. Obviously, you would argue yes, and I can see the logic from your belief system, right? I don't know if that's objectively true though, so I can see why you believe it. That's what I said.
But what I asked was something different. If I believe that their sin will lead them to damnation eternally, and I desire to warn them against that sin, would it not be a good desire that I have?
Depends what you mean by good.
Well, that's a question you don't want to ask because you won't be able to come up with any standard, but I
Yeah.
can.
Okay, keep that in mind. What he just threw out to Billy Martin, right? That's a question that Billy doesn't want to answer because Billy's not going to be able to come up with a standard.
Good as that would correspond to the character of God as universal. But I'm just saying, from your perspective, would it be a good thing from your perspective that I desire the best for the LGBTQ community?
I'm not exactly sure why he would even bother with it from your perspective, especially when he'll accuse people of especially atheists and skeptics of being needlessly subjective or relativistic. Like, well, from your perspective, isn't that fine? Like, oh,
by having them repent.
You say,
like, you keep saying that people have no standards, but literally by having the rainbow flag, we are upholding some standards. Whether they are objective or subjective is irrelevant. They are still standards which we uphold.
First of all, I never said you don't have standards. You might want to go to Carm and read the article, Can Atheists Be Moral?
Well, you did just
say that. This guy's going to jump. I think it might be Jack talking. He just said that he's not going to be able to come up with a standard. Now he's saying, no, I didn't. I never said you couldn't have standards. He just said that Billy wouldn't be able to establish a standard. For goodness.
Just say.
I thought maybe I misheard. Maybe I misheard, and if I did, that was my bad. But I thought you said that you have no standards. So if I was wrong,
come up with a standard.
Oh yeah, that was right. Yeah.
No standard of good. Yeah,
I can come up with many standards.
I don't do well with multiple speech because you guys know I'm autistic and have an auditory problem, right?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Matt. Billy, do you want to just talk to Matt about this? I think you're the best person.
Why would I be the best?
I'm not trying to be.
Because you're so good at philosophy. Okay, go ahead, Billy.
Haiti, that person talking, that was Haiti, who was on Clubhouse quite a bit. I like how she just sort of volunteers Billy for this. Billy's kind of like, what? Why me? Why? She's like, no, you're really good at this. Billy is usually good at these conversations. He's like, no, maybe not. But he's a good sport, and I think he does a pretty good job here from what I remember. But yeah, we'll see.
And I'm very just to be clear, I'm very straight, right? It's not because of
we know. Go ahead, Billy.
Yeah, okay. I'm just putting that out there for anyone, Okay, so yeah, I'm saying that I do have standards. I have many standards. I'm mostly a utilitarian. I believe it's wrong to cause pain unnecessarily in most cases. I'm a vegan, pretty strong vegan. I think it's immoral to hurt and kill animals if it's not necessary. I believe in looking after children, the future generations. So yeah, I mean, I have many standards.
Let's talk about the children thing because that's something that's very dear to me. It's always been for some strange reason. So do you think it's a good thing to have kindergartners be exposed to drag queen stories and cross-dressing and stuff like that in kindergarten?
Okay, so it's already like I already love where this is going because there's always this weird kind of thing, and I'm probably going to have to get into some tangents at some point, where these kinds of displays of gender, right? Which is he's talking about drag, right? Drag doesn't necessarily have to be trans, although I don't know if Matt gets that, right? Like you can do drag and not be trans. But drag is always this sort of kind of this thing that these guys I think now just associated with you must be trans, you must be gay, and I'm not trying to like weigh in on like whether what drag is or give some kind of definition of it, but it seems to me that what he's immediately starting to do here, right, is Matt's uncomfortable with the notion of drag, right, and I think what he's attempting to do at this point is now say, well, if it worries me, if it makes me uncomfortable, imagine what it does to 5-year-olds, right? And so for him, a 5-year-old being exposed to someone during performing in drag must be traumatizing. It must be the equivalent of child abuse, or whatever he's going to try to equate it to. And this is really, I think, I don't want to generalize this too much, but when I hear this kind of thing, when critics of the LGBTQ community immediately go to, what about our kids? They're using kids as a way to kind of weaponize a bigotry towards a group of people that doesn't make sense. And I'll get into that a little bit more, especially as Matt starts to trot out some more of the kind of broken theology that's used to kind of back up a lot of this kind of silliness. Some of these attitudes kind of make sense if your only exposure to alternative, alternative sexual orientations or anything like this, something in the minority. Your only exposure to it is from your religious tradition, and the only thing that your religious tradition can inform you on is that it's a bad thing that must go away or never be mentioned. And if it is mentioned, it's only mentioned as something that needs to be stopped or punished, harshly. So that does tend to color one's perceptions about things. And I just feel like Matt's from a generation where I mean he's not. It's not to say that he's that old. I mean, I'm from a generation where in a conservative enough environment, people had these attitudes about LGBTQ, but Matt definitely is firmly in that. So can't say that there's he was going to have to sort his way out of this kind of thing eventually. But some of the stuff that he gets into, it just doesn't. I don't get the impression he's really thinking too deeply about it. And when you start with the kids, well, how do you feel about kids seeing people in drag? I'll give you my answer. I don't give a shit. Right? Somebody dressed up like that. Like, I mean, what I would ask Matt in response to this, when I grew up as a kid, one of my favorite cartoon characters was Bugs Bunny, and Bugs Bunny would routinely dress in drag. Was that supposed to warp me permanently? Wait, that's not a good question. Matt Slick would probably describe me as warped. Never mind. Anyway, but the idea, plus not only that, but the idea of appearing in drag, as far as most of those cartoons goes, is not exactly sensitive. But the notion that it's a joke or it can be funny or that that it is something in fun was there. This idea that you can either play off drag as being mean-spirited, or you can do it as a celebration of people's kind of independence and their freedom of expression or something like that. It, like a lot of things, it depends on how you present it. So the way Matt's trying to do this whole thing with, oh, well, your 5-year-olds just be presented with drag. What does Matt mean by drag, right? I have a feeling that what Matt wants to project is like a New Orleans style, or like a Tijuana donkey show, or a New Orleans sex shop show, or something like that. Taking your kids to an S&M cafe. That's not drag. I mean, drag might have some drag might be a component in some of those things, but that's not necessarily what that means. So I think he's using a catch-all here that's not a catch-all.
Maybe sometimes not. Don't see a problem with it.
You don't see a problem with men dressing like women and pretending to be women and going in for kindergarten.
Was Bugs Bunny wrong? I mean, did Matt Slick ever want to cancel Bugs Bunny for dressing up like a woman to trick people? I know that seems like a weird statement, but like, I'm sure for in his, oh no, that's fine. That was all in good fun. Why was that all in good fun? I bet you anything that the reason it's all in good fun, if you ask Matt enough of it, is because it's a little bit mean. It's a little bit degrading. It's meant to be, right? The way Bugs Bunny does it, it's kind of cruel. That's okay. But if it's some kind of empowering thing where this is how people feel comfortable expressing themselves, Matt didn't want anything to do with it. Again, that's based on kind of where I'm going with drag. I think Matt might be thinking drag is like I said, like somewhere between like a pride parade after dark kind of thing where kids shouldn't be around, and something like, in a deleted scene from one of the Hellraiser films, something like that.
Wait, but what do you mean by woman?
A woman is someone who has XY chromosomes, has breasts, has vaginal area, the female stuff like that.
Vaginal area? What the hell?
That's what a woman is. I don't know if you know that or not, but it's been that way for.
Needlessly passive aggressive, Matt. I don't know if you knew that or not, but what a woman has, a woman has got the boobies and the long hair and the. Okay, way to go, Matt.
Nuns.
Well, I have a different understanding of woman. I mean, I have. No, it's all G. I mean, I take there's two
Let's get back to
different
this.
words.
Let's get back to the children.
Oh wait, but this is important though. This is important because I take it that there's two different uses of the word woman. There's
He's going to get into a good explanation here. Bipolar Bear, thank you very much for that donation. Thanks for all the unseen hours you put in, mate. Yep, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Let's see here, somebody I thought had asked a question. Jenna says, I'm sure he wants something ultra flamboyant. That could be it. I mean, there's a little bit of longing, I think, in Matt Slick's voice when he talks about drag, maybe. Like, do you think that's appropriate for kids? It's not, it's naughty. Like, oh, Matt, like, what kind of drag are you thinking about? I was just thinking about, people performing some tunes, expensive gowns. And let's see. Pantomime. That's the one I was looking for. Thank you, Simus. And let's see here. Unfortunately, the Max Slick wasn't around in Shakespeare's time when men dressed as women because women weren't allowed to weren't allowed to act. Yeah, the other thing that kind of gave me a perspective on this, because I've been, like I said, I was raised a conservative, culturally conservative Christian. When I went to Japan, I studied over there for a little while. No, it wasn't because I love anime. I'm not that big an anime fan. It's because I'm a pervert and I'm into hentai. When I got over there, I really liked a lot of the older culture and stuff like that, and they had the same tradition in a lot of their old, no theater and stuff like that. It wasn't uncommon for people to do this. Drag was a normal thing. Women were really allowed to be in those. It's in some cases, I don't know which theater tradition they did, but they even had their own kind of traveling trips, and so if women were traveling in those groups, it could be dangerous. So women's roles, usually men. Yeah.
First of all, I take it there's to be a biological sex. So if your biological sex is woman, then you have XX chromosomes, and so that's what I take the biological sex. And then there's a gender definition of woman, which is defined by the World Health Organization as the characteristics and traits typically associated with men, women, boys, and girls. And so under that definition, you can have someone with XX chromosomes, but their biological sex is male, but their gender is female. And so I don't see a problem with someone who has XX chromosomes, but identifies as a male.
Okay, so about the children, do you think it's a good thing for children to be exposed to drag queens, LGBTQ agenda in kindergarten?
Okay, so now he's switching it up. Now he's added a component. So Billy's laid out something I think is pretty good there, making a decent distinction between what we're talking about when we're talking about male and female in terms of sex versus what we're talking about man and woman in terms of gender, and there's a difference. And then Matt comes back, basically the same question, but the kids, what about the children? And what about this LGBTQ agenda that they could be exposed to? That's slightly different than drag, right? A lot of drag shows that I've ever happened to run across, and I gotta say, I think that the last time I saw any were either in Japan or in New Orleans. They had nothing to do with an LGBTQ agenda. They were about having fun. They were about putting on a show. They had nothing to do about, like, I really do think that Matt thinks that, like, drag performance is like, we're here to convert your kid and make him gay. Like, I can't really fathom enough why he's like this, because here's a good test for Matt, right? Like, your kid should be kept away from these people who do this drag stuff, who have this agenda. Okay, you just don't want your kids to be exposed to this kind of stuff. And there are plenty of people, right wing, left wing, Christian, skeptic, or whatever. They're going to have to varying degrees. Are going to have. It's going to depend on the kid whether or not they're comfortable, like letting their kid into something that. Again, this depends. If it's just a drag show, drag just on its own is not a sexually explicit or illicit kind of thing. But if it was something that was a little bit more, sexually provocative or something like that, you probably wouldn't want your kid going, right? Because your kid's not going to understand it. And, why confuse them? Why throw them off? But that being said, now he wants to know about the agenda. This is the part where the Christian theology aspect of it, this is the big failing, where Christianity starts to fall apart. Because for me, this is what gets them worked up. If there's some kind of an agenda here, right? If they meet us halfway, right? And by us, I mean people who don't have an issue with homosexuality, who understand an orientation, right? The sexuality is not a crime spree. It's not a verb. It's an adjective to describe a person's orientation. If they met us halfway and they have an understanding of that, then the idea of like, I need to protect my kids from being exposed to these people and their advocacy, that would follow with heterosexual people as well, right? Cisgender heterosexual adults should be kept away from opposite sex kids, right? Because they're going to get them, they're going to groom them, they're going to, they're going to try to impregnate them or, get impregnated by them, right? That doesn't seem to be a concern in terms of the relationships between heterosexual adults and kids. But when it comes to homosexuals, all of a sudden, these Christians come in here, and I don't even think somebody like Matt Slick realizes it. He doesn't realize that he's toting that in, right? But he doesn't understand orientation, because oftentimes he's going to end up getting tripped up over, and a lot of evangelicals do this. They can't figure out what orientation is. They really don't understand that people. We have had people of alternate, who have been homosexual forever. The history of the animal, right? History of the species. And the notion of being that is about what you're attracted to, not what you do. And for some strange reason, Christianity is still running with this idea that homosexual equals a perpetrator. And it's just mistaken.
I don't think it's a good or
Yeah.
a bad thing. I think it's neutral.
So it's not bad then, right?
No,
It's
I
neither
don't
good
view
nor
it
bad.
as
It's
a
not
bad
bad.
thing.
Okay, so it's not bad to do that. So if the
Yeah.
parents say they don't want it, then who should have the final say, the state or the parents?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not sure how to answer that. I think it would come down to the particular cases, right? I mean, there are certain religious freedoms which I think should be impinged upon. I think there are some religions
Wow.
who against.
You
I think
just
you're going to
scared the
agree with
crap
me.
out of me. You scared the
I
freaking
think you're
crap
going
out
to.
of me.
Yeah, no, I thought at first he was acting. I thought he was acting a little bit, playing this up a little bit. I don't think he is.
I think you're.
You're a
I think you're going to agree.
totalitarian. Whoa.
I think you. I think you're going to agree with me in about 5 seconds. So there are some religions who will allow their children to die because they think it's immoral for their child to get a blood transfusion. I think those religious freedoms should be impinged upon to save the life of the child. Do you disagree with that?
That's a different topic. So
It is, but it is comparable to some of the things you're talking about, man. I love this. Like, whoop. No, I'm not going to talk about Christian scientists.
I'm asking you
What?
specifically. You're talking about the Jehovah's Witnesses
Wait,
and then their blood transfusion stuff. I have articles
wait,
written
can
on
you
it and
just
things like that.
answer?
And the state comes in, and then you're talking about the issue of within Christianity. They're a non-Christian cult. There's a lot attached there. What I'm intrigued about is the idea.
See, so that's how he dismisses that, because Christian scientists aren't real Christians. Therefore, we're just talking about a cult. We're not talking about actual Christianity. Billy, I think, actually brings up here in a good second, in a second here, and it's right to do. Like, that's not what we're talking about. It doesn't matter that Matt Slick thinks Christian scientists are not real Christians and that they're, quote, just a cult. What matters is that in this country they do have freedom of religion, and one of their beliefs entails that they allow their kids to die when there are life-saving medical treatments available to prevent that. And Billy has stated, I think that that's something that should be impinged upon. That's an aspect of their belief system that should be impinged upon. And Matt has just decided, no, we're not going to talk about that because it's not the same topic, and it doesn't matter anyway. Those Christian Scientists aren't real Christians. None of this has anything to do with the point that Billy was attempting to make, and Matt has ignored it. So Jack writes, I think Slick is referring to Drag Queen Story Hour, which isn't compelled by any school. It's just some drag queens who do their little show at local libraries. Yeah, I've seen stuff like that where they've been invited to let's see, they've been at like local parades and things like that. But what will end up happening is like video footage or photographs will end up showing up there, and they'll say like, well, this was at the elementary school playground, and it's like, that was downtown, small town, anywheresville, Missouri, or something like that. And it's like, it doesn't, because it's in a relatively conservative location, I don't have enough people to clutch their pearls there. They're like, well, they forced this onto our kids. Like, no, they didn't.
That when the parents say, no, we don't want, it's not blood transfusions to save a life. That's not the same thing. A kindergartner, okay? And you want to have transvestites and queer and cross-dressers come in and teach them about sexuality. So you say that's okay.
Okay, that's different than a drag show, Matt. Now all of a sudden he's talking about sex ed. Right now, so this has gone from, it started off with a 5-year-old kid seeing someone in drag to being a 5-year-old seeing someone in drag who's bringing that LGBTQ agenda, quote unquote, all caps, with them. And now it's the drag person with that agenda teaching your kids about sex, and not just any sex, the gay sex. Like this is just listening to him talk about this stuff. It's like listening to my, somebody's grandparents talk about the communist menace. It's just it's this whole. Oh, it's so old fashioned, but I'm sure Matt would describe it as classical and traditional.
Okay. So, and I'm going to ask you. So who has? Oh my goodness. Wow. So who has the final authority? The state or the parent in that situation?
Well, that's an interesting story. Listen, do they teach human reproduction in kindergarten? I don't think they do. I don't even think they get close to it because they don't need to. The notion of so what Matt's setting up here is kind of a weird situation, because again, he started this off with drag queens or people in drag in any variety, and 5-year-olds being exposed to them, right? Okay, so now it's already, I mean, this didn't even start on the rails. But despite that fact, it's still careening rapidly out of control and veering way, way off its original course. Now, all of a sudden, okay, what's implied with that question? Who has the ultimate say? Ultimate say with what? Who is when my kid gets exposed to this information? Because as far as I know, no 5-year-old is being taught by anyone about anything with regards to sex at 5. I don't know of any kindergartners that are getting sex ed. No, maybe I'm wrong, but yeah. So without getting into that, now he's like, okay, well, who ultimately has a say over that? The state or the parents? Well, it depends, right? If you could demonstrate that there was a teacher that was attempting to teach kids sex ed at, say, the ages of 5 or 6, right, and that was against the state, state curriculum doesn't have that. Obviously, you got a rogue teacher that's doing something outside the norm, right? And that's probably not going to fly. Nobody agreed with that. Nobody agrees on that. That's, even if somebody was like, hey, I don't care that my kid had, I had kind of a talk with my 7-year-old or 6-year-old where kind of initially set things up because they already had questions or something. So maybe there are some parents who are just like, I don't know that I don't know that I care. Maybe I'm open to that if there's a responsible way to teach my kid that early, right? But that's beside the point. As far as schools go, there's a set curriculum. And I love how Matt talks about this kind of stuff, because it's as if there's two different ways that this works out, right? There's either nothing bad can happen in schools, everything bad is happening in schools, or the reality, which is schools are just boring, right? And the reality really needs to win out, especially when you're talking to somebody who's got their pearls clutched as tight as Matt's got here, because schools and school curriculums are really remarkably pretty conservative, right? They'd like to avoid a lot of this kind of stuff for the most part. Now, it depends on the school districts and some of the things that they can, what they can do. But this is one of those issues where it's like, well, what you have are these radical agendaists, the LGBTQ radicals that are going into schools, and they're trying to tell you that, and get this, the story changes. They're either trying to tell you, they're telling your kids that it's okay that they're gay. It's telling their kids that gay sex is okay, or what they're really thinking, and some people say this quiet part out loud, they're making my kids gay, right? Most of them won't say that part out loud because they know they're going to get ridiculed for that shit. But a lot of these kinds of parents believe that. They still believe that that influence can hold sway. So it is what it is.
Okay. So I just want to recapitulate that when you said, you scared the crap out of me when I said that I think certain religious freedoms should be impinged upon. It seems like you didn't disagree that in the case that I gave, that, you know, that those religious freedoms to basically kill the child should be impinged upon. But I will try and answer your question. So the case you're representing is specific, right? That there are parents who do not want their children to be, I don't know, exposed to the LGBTQ plus community, and they don't want their children to see transgender people or something like that.
They want them to be taught sexuality by strangers who cross-dress. Okay, so is it the right of the?
Oh, you can hear it. You can hear it in his voice starting to catch. They want to teaching sexuality. Okay, what does that mean? Teaching sexuality. He started off with drag, right? So it's obviously wrong if a 5-year-old sees, let's say, women dressed as men, right? Women wearing suits and pretending to be businessmen and doing a song and dance routine. We're seeing men in evening gowns and ball gowns and singing and dancing, right? This is obviously a bad thing, right? Because is this sexuality on display, right? I really do think for Matt, there's no difference between sexual roles and just sex, the act of sex here, because this seems really disturbing to him. And I kind of wonder, like, okay, if I expose my child to, to my mechanic, right, who is the manliest man I've ever seen, full beard. He makes Ron Swanson look like Pee Wee Herman, and he's working on my car, and I expose my kid to that amount of just cisgender heterosexuality. I mean, where's my responsibility, right? I should shield my kid from those kinds of overt displays of sexuality, right? Of male gender on display, right? Clearly, that's not what this is, right? That's not what Matt means, right? Those roles are good. Exposing your kid to that role, that performance, that's good. Exposing them to something that kind of like that for Matt, this is incongruous, right? Like men in evening gowns, women in suits. Oh, everything's topsy turvy. What's next? Cats and dogs getting along. They do, but yeah, it's the mind. It's weird because even coming from a conservative perspective, I remember being in kind of this position and being this kind of like ignorant and just sort of accepting some of these claims from my church. And then as I slowly got out of that, wondering like, oh my God, why wasn't I more critical about this kind of stuff? And even now, what makes this frustrating is that I can hear somebody like Matt Slick trying to make these kinds of comments, and they really are as superficial as they are. I really do think that. I don't think they go any deeper than Matt thinks they're icky and they need to be stopped. And at the very least, kids should be kept away from them, right? It's just, and it doesn't matter what it is, right? He just kind of lumps everything together into this, what he thinks is a great big bucket of worldly secular perversion. And if your kids get even such as a whiff of that, they're, next thing you know, your son's putting on lipstick and, your daughter's welding, like, oh my God, call Jesus.
Parent of the child to say, I don't want someone in a state-run school telling my child what is sexually right and wrong. Does the parent have that final?
Actually, the teachers don't actually teach kids what's sexually right and wrong, right? As far as I know. And the idea here is still we're talking about very young kids whom these teachers aren't even teaching, right? And sex ed is a very underfunded thing. Like for the most part, wasn't it the case that, last time we checked, thanks to guys, President George W. Bush, that most of the funding went to like abstinence only education. Now, Matt doesn't have a problem with that, right? That's an okay. The state can tell your kid that the right kind of sex to have is none at all, right? But here he's indignant. How dare these state officials, in quotes, probably with flames in the background to indicate their, diabolical origins. How dare they assume the role of telling our kids what's right and what's wrong sexually? Well, it was perfectly fine when they were the abstinence only agents. I don't think that people realize how bad that was. I mean, especially in like the Midwest and stuff. I mean, those there were whole like groups that were kind of privately farmed out to go do this kind of stuff. These guys didn't bat an eye. It didn't matter that they were private contractors or if the states had initiated this thing. No issues at all about moralizing about sexual issues as long as it was from a quote unquote biblical perspective. And there were plenty of Christians who thought that the biblical perspective of sex that they were teaching kids was not responsible and not even particularly biblical. I mean, if you've read some of the books of the Old Testament, you know that's not biblical. But here we are with Matt. Now he's getting good and worked up, right? How dare they teach our kids? Well, the whole point of this is a public health issue. That's one of the reasons. And the other issue is that if you're running an institution that has these kids in it for 6 to 9 hours a day, these kids spend a lot of time socializing with each other, and you might want to, as they start to develop and grow and mature, tell them about how to work their stuff. A little. I mean, it's true that most things don't come with with an instruction manual, but a lot of things do. We have a lot more information about how things work than we did before in the past. There's no reason to send kids fumbling around in the dark, figuratively and literally in this case, and then just having to deal with the consequences later. Especially when we're trying to shut off, reproductive rights and access to birth control.
Final authority, or does the state have the final authority?
I would say the state does, Matt. I forgot to check on this here. Justin, thank you very much for the super chat. Why would anyone expect a group that tries to prevent education around sex, gender, body health, or identification and don't believe in premarital sex or sex ed to have any kind of informed opinion? Yeah, no, I mean, that's actually the problem here. What's scary is that as a society, I think, even as a secular society, kind of, we're in this position where, well, everybody gets a say in this kind of thing. But so often we have these kinds of loudmouth evangelical Christians who are, I mean, it's not just that they're wrong. It's like, it's that some of the stuff that they're actively advocating for is harmful. It's backward. And it fails, 10 times out of 10. It's just, it doesn't get the results they claim they need. And most of it is about, ultimately at the end of the day, them being able to live self-satisfied, knowing that, well, my kids go to a state school that only teaches abstinence, which is what we believe is correct, right? It doesn't matter that abstinence only education doesn't work. It doesn't matter that it leads to more STDs, more unwanted pregnancies, all of that kind of stuff. They don't give a shit about that. They care about being smug and self-righteous. And I'm really serious about this. I'm speaking even from my own perspective. When I was a cultural conservative, good liberal Republican, that is the point. They don't care about the fault. If people fuck up and get that stuff wrong, if they can't play ball in this world where we tell you what's right and what's wrong and you get it wrong, then you have to live with the consequences. Christians have no problem with that. The notion that you're dealing with kids who are developing and who are going to make mistakes by design. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. And you don't take steps to plan for the worst. Everything's based on hoping for the best. That's evil. There's no real way around that. You're planning on a world where you're practically hoping that there's going to be more misery, right? I mean, you hope that everybody's going to do things your way. Realistically, that's not going to happen. And you don't care that people fail, and you don't care that they're miserable. What matters is that Matt Slick doesn't get winded thinking about kids, 5-year-old kids being exposed to a drag performance. Thanks again, Justin.
The reason why, and I'm not trying to be evasive, but the reason why I'm having difficulty answering this question is because it's a very broad question. And in certain cases, I might say that the parents should have the right to educate the child. In certain cases, I think it should be the state should get involved, right? I mean, like, let's say
I gave you
have,
a specific. I gave you a specific.
Did he?
Okay.
no. I mean, it's very broad. I mean, like,
No, it's not.
if you
You really didn't, Matt, because it depends on when you're talking about. Does the state have the final authority to decide that our 5-year-olds get mandatory sex ed? No, none. I don't know where Matt's been living. Maybe he must have homeschooled all of his kids, because no school curriculum ever gets done without input from the parents, right? I mean, all you have to do is look at the news about the people that were showing up at the parent-teacher conferences at some of the school districts, like the ones in Virginia, where a couple political activist groups managed to whip up a concern about they're teaching our kids about critical race theory. They weren't. They're telling them that they need to feel bad because slavery was a part of the nation's history and because of the state. It is, and they weren't trying to make your kid feel bad. It's a little bit telling that you assume that if we talk about slavery and because you and your kid are white, you just expect you need to put on the black hat and play the bad guy. Like, nobody's asking you to do that, right? You could maybe side with the slaves and the people that helped them and the abolitionists, but what the fuck ever. But this all kind of has a pattern here. But even something like that, where they kind of gin up this sort of this crisis that doesn't go anywhere, those schools couldn't avoid the public backlash, and that was over nothing. There wasn't anything to fix. There was no critical race theory in there. And this is one of these other, there's nothing here. 5-year-olds are not being taught sex ed. It's just not happening. So when Matt's saying, like, well, who gets to decide that? Well, obviously, it's already been decided. Parents and school districts work in tandem to come up with curriculum. It almost always the establishment of public school curriculum always happens with public input and public feedback. Always. It's probably one of the things that makes that kind of a job difficult, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, I would side with some of the educators, because they're hopefully they have education in childhood development, child psychology, educational pedagogical methods, so they know what's going to work best, right? But it's not as if they don't take the parents' concerns into consideration. The fucked up thing here, though, is that Matt wants teachers to take this concern into consideration, and it's not a legitimate concern, because sex ed for 5-year-olds is not on the agenda.
well, if you're saying that, okay, should schools be allowed to teach children that it's okay to have same-sex relationships? Do you want to go with maybe that example? Like,
No.
no.
I want to go with the example that I know has really happened, and I want to know about you. And this one thing, we're just using this as a starting point. Do you think it's okay, or who has the final authority to teach sexual morality to the kindergartners, the parents or the state?
It's sexual morality now. Okay, because sex ed is usually about, like, you're talking about anatomy, health, that kind of stuff, not about. See what he's already doing here, like whether or not you should have sex or shouldn't have sex, or you boys should only be having sex with girls, and you girls should only be having sex with boys, but none of you should be having sex at all right now, because that's not how things work. All of you need to put rings on each other's fingers, and then get yourselves full-time paying jobs, and then start having kids right now. Like, that's not their job, right? Like, I wonder about this. Like, would Matt Slick be fine with a sex ed class in which they told the kids, like, here's what has to happen. You will need to have a relationship, and what we've seen is that it's more successful if you do it now, right? Get involved with your high school sweetheart. Don't have sex, abstain from sex completely, and then get married as soon as you graduate high school. That's the recommendation that we have. That way you're not tempted after high school, I kind of would Matt have a problem with a state official telling their kids, like, what you need to do? I mean, I don't think he'd have a problem with the abstinence part, but the next message. You need to put a ring on each other's fingers and then get to breeding right after high school. I'm sure Matt would say that that's, well, maybe that's a bridge too far, right? But there's absolutely, from a biblical perspective, there's nothing wrong with that message. That's totally moral, right? And that state official, are they acting outside? You know, like, I think most of us would agree that they're like, hey, butt out. Right? That's none of your business. But from Matt Slick's vaunted biblical perspective, the biblical tradition, nothing wrong with that, regardless of the potentially harmful consequences that's going to lead to financially, economically, psychologically.
Do I want drag queens to teach kindergartens how to have sex?
Do you want to have? I said, who has the final authority? Final authority. I keep asking that. The parents or the state when it comes to teaching sexuality to kindergartners?
I think it's whoever has the right view should have the final authority.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I hope sincerely before my Lord, I hope you never gain power.
Are you asking who does on this show?
Because
Okay.
because
I don't think
Yes,
anybody,
loving it.
I don't think
Because-
anybody should teach
Because-
kindergartens how to have sex. Like drag queen or no, like kindergartens should
you just
learn to play with Lego.
perhaps I misunderstood you. It certainly seems as though you're contradicting yourself now. So you're saying that the parents have the final say. Is that what you're saying?
No, I never said that. If parents gonna say, yes, I want my kindergarten child to be taught how to have sex by a drag queen, I'm gonna be like, no, what the hell are you doing? Your kindergarten child should not be taught how to have sex. If the state
why?
says
Is that
that, I'm gonna be like,
Okay. Well, you're a moral anti-realist, right?
yeah, that's correct.
So why are you saying they shouldn't?
I love how quickly, like, anything outside of Christianity might as well be nihilism for Matt. So I don't even understand why he's trafficking in the term. Like, well, you're a moral anti-realist, right? Like, maybe actually have, like, if you're going to have that discussion, they're like, hey, maybe have Billy flesh that particular stance out. But I love how Matt does this. Like, well, you're a moral anti-realist, right? That doesn't mean you don't have morals. Like, I love this. Like, well, you know, if you're a moral anti-realist, you don't believe in any morality at all. No, Matt, no. Right? And even if you're a nihilist, I think you can be moral. But Matt just seems to think that a moral anti-realist is equivalent to a moral nihilist.
Because that's what I desire.
Okay, no offense, but that's it. Just because you don't
Yeah,
like it?
that's it.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So if the parents don't like it, is it equally in power?
Not in my eyes.
You're a hypocrite. So for you, as long as what you think is right, that's okay. But if someone else has the same premise and thinks what you think is right is wrong, then that's a wrong for them.
Well, it might be
Well-
right for them. It's like, look, let's take this proposition.
Where's a
Let's-
wall? I'm gonna bang my head against the wall.
Let's take this proposition, right? Chocolate cake is tasty, right? And you ask, is that proposition true or false? Well, it's just going to depend, right? Because that's a subjective proposition. So for me, I had chocolate cake yesterday, right? And for me, that proposition is correct, right? Chocolate.
Yeah. Okay. So now they're going to get into some philosophy a little bit here. But Ratsnick, if given I think that's supposed to be choice, would Matt rather expose his kids to sex or violence? Well, definitely, it's probably got to be violence. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't think there's any debate. I mean, obviously, wouldn't want a small kid saying, like, you know, something super violent. You know, 4-year-old watching RoboCop with a big smile on his face, but or her face. But you know, then again, who knows with Matt Slick? The thing that I kind of wonder about this, because this is always one of those things where your kid needs to be. I don't want my kid being exposed to that kind of thing. Like, kids shouldn't be exposed to these agenda people and their stuff. Okay, what does Matt think? I mean, I think we can probably all guess, but what do you do in a situation where you have a state like Nevada where certain kinds of sex work are legal? right? And I think it's safe to say that some of those sex workers are using that money to support families. They have kids. Should their kids not be exposed to their parents because their parents are sex workers? Should the state step in and separate those kids from those adults? Or is there a way to kind of, or maybe some of those people capable of making that distinction? It might be a little bit uncharitable, but I think it's important to bring this kind of stuff up because Matt is one of these kinds of evangelicals that he's almost quick to throw a scarlet letter on anybody in the LGBTQ community and just want them distanced from the conversation completely because of the harmful effects they're going to have on the kids. He really does. It's apparent with the way he's talking to Billy Martin that he believes in these agenda stories, that there are these activists and advocates that are in the school system actively trying to make it. They're not there to tell, to get the message out there for kids who are gay that it's okay and that things get better and all that kind of stuff. What Matt sees that as you have these people in there giving these kids permission to be sinful, perpetrators of homosexuality. Because remember, it's not an orientation, it's perpetration. It's really no different than engaging in acts of crime, as far as Matt's concerned. I'm sure. I don't think he would mind that analogy. I think he'd be. In fact, I think most Christians would probably be fine with that. The problem is that if they were fine with that, they would have to give up on this pretense that they supposedly understand how sexual orientation works. Because when it comes to asserting a lot of these claims, it's based on either a complete misunderstanding of how orientation works or a sort of willful ignorance about the implications of what that orientation means, right? Heterosexuality does not make people preternaturally dangerous, but for some strange reason, homosexuality does. And they're in the spectrum of orientation. That's not what makes an individual dangerous, right? There's other factors that come in to this in terms of like human beings and their interpersonal relationships and their sexual relationships and all this kind of stuff. Orientation is really kind of irrelevant. Formative for the person, but this kind of stuff is just paranoid nonsense.
Cake is tasty, but for some sociopath, right, who for some reason doesn't like chocolate cake, that proposition's just going to be false. So to ask the question, is chocolate cake is chocolate cake tasty? Is that true or false? Well, it's just an incoherent question, because the answer to that question is going to depend on who you're asking.
I think then it's wrong. Parents, or excuse me, for people to teach kindergartners in school context, transvestites, whatever, to teach them sexuality, right?
I think it would be wrong for anyone to teach
Yeah. Normalize this again. I didn't think it was going to speed him up. He's starting to. I'm going to rewind that a little bit.
The answer to that question is going to depend on who you're asking.
I think then it's wrong. Parents, or excuse me, for people to teach kindergartners in school context, transvestites, whatever, to teach them sexuality, right?
I think it would be wrong for.
Now see, this started off as this goofy hypothetical, which and Billy's been more than charitable because he's been willing to. I would have thrown this right back at Matt. I wouldn't have even trafficked in that. I would have immediately been like, "What kind of example is this?" Because it's total straw man and complete paranoia. Who's teaching? Like it would be. There would be a controversy if heterosexual cisgender people were teaching 5-year-olds sex ed. Especially if the curriculum was about how to have it, who to have it with, and do it right now, and they actually had to go through exercises or something. Because I have an idea that that scenario is playing out in Matt's head. This horrible work camp where kindergartners aren't just told what sex is; they're instructed in the ways of it. and it's being done by these drag queens, but seriously, like all Matt has to do with his particular mental exercise is just erase the specter of the drag queens that he's got in his head. Just replace that with replace that with priests.
Anyone to teach kindergartens about sexuality.
You can't say it's wrong. You said there's no morals.
What I mean by wrong is I don't desire it.
So your desire is now what was morally right or wrong?
For me, yeah.
Well, I think it's more than that. It's what you think for others too. A lot of the time, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's my standards that I uphold, but I mean, I just don't care what anybody else. I mean, I don't even care what God says, right? Like, if God tells me to torture my family to death, I'm not gonna care. I'm not gonna do it. I don't care what anybody
When you
says.
meet him and you talk to him, you won't be asking any questions. You'll be making mistakes. You'll be sobbing in his holy presence, waiting in dread what's going to happen to you.
I know.
Okay.
Anybody else?
So Matt's already got Billy. So Billy's been having a perfectly cordial conversation with Matt, and Matt has him fitted for eternal conscious torment. When you die and you meet the God that I'm talking about, oh, buddy, you're gonna get it. Nice guy, Matt. What a prick.
Anybody else want to?
I mean, it would be even more insulting if it were real, right? I mean, but the fact that like these guys will run with this kind of intelligence, like as a Christian, Matt should, if Matt really believes that Billy's opinions are leading him to hell, if anything, he should probably pity him, right? Now, I mean, yeah, maybe rebuke him, especially now. If Billy was saying he was a Christian and he was all about, sex ed for 5-year-olds in a crazy bacchanalian free for all, yeah, that'd be weird. Matt's got him fitted for eternal conscious torment, and Billy has agreed with him that 5-year-olds should not be taught sex. No sex ed for 5-year-olds. They agree on this, and Matt's still huffing and puffing like he's talking to one of Satan's right-hand men. I mean, this is how little thought goes into some of these conversations sometimes, and this is why I don't have a lot of respect for. Well, I really have very little respect for Matt Slick, because I think a lot of his like little theological opinions are much better thought out than some of these hot cultural takes he's trying to dish up here. But let's see if he manages to just sort of mischaracterize this conversation even more.
To go to the top of the hour. So I'm actually getting interested more and more in the LGBTQ stuff. I want to see the rationale. Why is it then that you never, ever hear about a public debate on TV between a competent member of the opposing views? Why is that the case?
Of what view?
LGBTQ.
You never hear a competent representative of the LGBTQ?
No, I didn't say that. I said a competent opposing view, a debate between two people who are very competent on the opposing views regarding LGBTQ.
Okay, why would you have a debate about something that broad? Like if Matt, this is why Matt's automatically disqualified from any of those kinds of discussions, because you wouldn't have a debate about the LGBTQ. You want to talk about the issues of lesbianism, homosexuality, bisexual issues, trans issues, queer issues. You're gonna do all that in one. So he's just like, well, you guys bundled it up. Like, yeah, they had to, because they're banded together as a form of advocacy and outreach for each other. And to spread the word and educate people who unfortunately still subscribe to Matt's kind of goofy worldview on this. But that is weird. Like, why don't you see this kind of debate happen? Well, the problem is what usually happens is that most people that are going to debate, quote unquote, the LGBTQ thing, they're going to be coming from a Christian perspective, and they're automatically incompetent. Right? I've mentioned this before. I don't talk about this that often with any of my shows. But when it comes to like homosexuality in the Christian church in the United States, the Christian church is ridiculously awful at it. Even the ones that are tolerant of it are really, really bad at this kind of stuff. If you want a good example, track down some of Mike Winger's stuff, right? Mike Winger, he's a nice guy. Watch him talk about homosexuality and watch him completely fuck it up. He doesn't understand orientation. He doesn't understand developmental psychology. I mean, you don't have to be experts at that, but he doesn't even understand the basics of just sexual orientation. He's one of these kinds of guys like Matt that thinks like there's an easy way to ask these guys about this, and I apologize if this gets too graphic. All you have to do is ask them this. If you were sent to prison, right? Hopefully that doesn't happen to you. All right. Well, we won't even make it about them because it can get a little too fraught if you do it this way. You might get punched in the face. Imagine a guy, right? And we'll say he's a married guy. He's a heterosexual dude, married. He's got kids, and he identifies as being straight, right? He is arrested for a crime. He's convicted, right? We're not going to get into whether or not he's, innocent or guilty or not. That doesn't matter. He goes and he's doing time. He's sexually assaulted in prison, right? Another inmate sodomizes him. Is the victim, the guy we started with, the new convict, is he now gay? Was that gay, right? And is he now gay? Has he engaged in a homosexual act, right? Clearly he was attacked, right? I've asked this a couple of times to Christians and gotten some stalls because they wonder, like, well, right? I'm like, no, right? The quick, easy answer to this, if you understand orientation, is obviously not, because the act has nothing to do with one's orientation. The person that actually sodomized that guy might not have even that orientation himself, might not be a homosexual himself. There's a difference between the act, there's a difference between orientation. There's a difference, and these guys cannot separate homosexual activities and homosexual orientation. They really can't. At the end of the day, they can't, because they're keeping score, and that's why for many of them it's like, oh well, at the end of the day, we all have our burdens. Just don't you might think those thoughts, you might be attracted, you as a guy might be attracted to other man, you as a woman may be attracted to another woman. Just don't act on those thoughts, don't act on those feelings, and you'll be fine. Now, if they go to the book of Matthew, where Jesus says, I tell you, if even you thought it in your heart, you've committed the act. Well, now if they're Christians and they're really concerned, they might end up committing suicide now, right? Because some lazy minister or youth pastor or something was like, well, at the end of the day, just don't do it, right? It's just a temptation, right? But here's where things get fraught, and this is why I think homosexuality is really, well, before I get into that little lecture, I'll stop and do this. Let's see. Justin, thank you again for the super chat. Kent Hovind, been to prison, should get him on the channel and ask him. I do kind of wonder, like, I wonder, especially with guys like that, sort of these crusty old dudes that are just like, they supposedly got it all figured out. Ask them that, right? They can't figure it out. For them, being gay, it's an accusation. It's a verb. You did something that was like, homosexuality is this performative thing, and in their case, a crime, right? Some of the more incendiary ones on here, it's equivalent to murder and to theft and all this other stuff, right? It's not an orientation. And if they get into the orientation part, they're usually dragged into it by the nose by a Christian who's struggling with their sexual identity and is like, hey, I'm a Christian and I think I have that orientation. What do I do? The best advice that any of these ministers can give them, right, that disagree with homosexuality, is to tell them that you need to suppress it. That's it. Don't do it. You have to suppress that aspect of yourself. You need to be celibate for the rest of your life, or you need to figure out how to engage in sex acts with somebody of the opposite sex. But you can't do the thing that you're oriented to do. That's something that you cannot do, right? And I'm sorry that those are things that you feel, but we all have our burdens, right?
How come we don't?
Well,
hear about
I don't know if that's the case, but let me give you an example. And I don't mean any type of disrespect at all by this, man, but I think a lot of Christians probably said that about you when you were on the Daily Show. I don't think that you're incompetent.
No, they Frankenstein me.
Here we
Things
go.
together from different segments to make me say what I did not say. He lied.
For any of you who don't know this, back in the old days of the Daily Show, back when Jon Stewart was running it, they had a show and they had Matt Slick on. Matt Slick, I think this was back in 2018, maybe 2017, something like that. It was back a while, and it was interesting because I actually a friend of mine that attended a church in this neck of the woods. They had asked his pastor to go on because his pastor was quite outspoken about gay marriage issues. And my friend's pastor, I think, prudently refused. Well, Matt Slick, always the gadfly, was more than willing to jump on, in front of that bullet, and he did. And he went on, and it was a video essay segment on one of the shows. Samantha Bee was still on the show. She did it. She interviewed him, and it did not go well, right? Matt has been, anytime this has come up, Matt's constant defense has been that they quote unquote Frankensteined him, that they took things that he said out of context, that they edited things in ways that made him look bad. They didn't have to. If you go and watch that segment, if you find that Daily Show segment and you listen to the responses that he's given, now any of those segments are edited for time. They sit down and they have an interview and they have questions for Matt. Obviously, it doesn't get aired start to finish, right? And they do edits and they do reshoots, especially for the interviewer. If sound doesn't work or something like that, they'll reshoot it. Matt, he lost his mind over this. Like apparently he's never he was behind the scenes for a little bit, and then when he realized it wasn't exactly that way on TV, he just couldn't figure out why they had done this to him. But if you go back, in all fairness, go and find that segment and pull it apart and listen to the questions that are being asked and listen to the statements that he's giving. The statements that he's given are not out of the norm for anything else that he's ever said about gay marriage or other LGBTQ issues. They're not. But he still continually says, well, they made me look bad. Like, that was the reason that the other pastor didn't go on the show, because he knew, like, the whole point of getting a conservative evangelical outlook on this was that for that particular audience, the Daily Show, I mean, they're going to punch on you, right? Any of those kinds of Christian evangelical claims, the foundational right-wing ones that are against gay marriage and against the LGBTQ community, are going to get laughed off because most of the claims are stupid. Especially for them, they just seem absurd, right? And they're usually grounded in something goofy, right? And Matt kind of availed himself to this kind of stuff the way he does here. It did not go well. So here he is now again, years later, and Tom, beautifully brings this up and is like, yeah, well, I think there were some Christians that kind of said the same thing about you, Slick. They were critical of Matt Slick even going on. I know, because at the time I wasn't that long an atheist, and I was having conversations with an evangelical of the Reformed persuasion, and so he would let me know. We would have conversations about this kind of thing, and he was like smacking his head. He's like, I'd never heard of this Matt Slick guy, and what a doofus going on to a show like the Daily Show to talk about this and expecting that your opinion is going to be taken seriously, right? But when I asked him, he tried to tell me he agreed with him. They're like, yeah, I think they twisted Matt's words. I think they edited this carefully. They edited that carefully. I went in and took a look at it. No, they didn't. They didn't. They reshot some of the questions being asked to him and these kinds of things. So Matt was like, well, that part right there where she asked me that question, that's not when she asked me that question. Like, okay. So they took things out of order and they cut things out of order, or they refilmed her asking the same question twice. In fact, I think there was even a response from the Daily Show producers responding to Matt Slick's criticism, saying, we didn't take your stuff out of context. We didn't edit any of your comments. I mean, obviously the interview was edited and spliced for time, but your comments, your responses were left whole. And he almost tried to smell like, oh, they picked a word here and they picked a word there and they changed this and they changed that. They didn't. This is just one of those rare moments where Matt realizes, like, somebody holds up a mirror to him and to show him, like, this is how you look. And he's like, oh, why'd you make me look so goofy? Like, why'd you show up here dressed up like a clown?
I'm sure they did that.
What's that?
What they do?
I'm sure they did that. Yeah.
Yeah, they did. I have the recording. They don't know it, but I recorded everything from the beginning to the end.
I want to know about that because he claims that he had the entire thing recorded. He may have, But what he's talking about is the actual sit down with Samantha Bee. He had that whole thing recorded, and I don't know exactly. It's like, well, if I showed you that recording, you'd see something very, very different. I doubt we would. We'd just see something really, really long. It was like a 4.5 minute video essay. But not naturally the entire. It's going to be snippets of their interview and their conversation together. It's not going to be the whole thing.
And
Well, they're in the business of making something entertaining.
even when they pursued me heavily and said that they would never do that, then they did. But, what do you expect? At least I got to give the gospel to somebody while I was there.
They didn't take him out of context. Take my word for it or don't. But if you take a look at it, I don't think that it's actually going to be boring. If you take my word for it and you watch the clip, you're not going to see anything. You're not going to hear anything come out of Matt Slick that you haven't heard before, right? And it's going to make his protestations of like, well, look at how bad they made me look. Like, I don't think they made you look bad. I mean, the interesting thing about it is if anybody ever has an opportunity, take the statements that he made, pull them out of context, and then if you have an opportunity to talk to him on Clubhouse, quote it back to him verbatim and ask him if he agrees with it. He's going to agree with it. Oh yeah, I agree with that completely. Okay, well that's how you answered question number 4 in the video that was shown here. So exactly how did they take you out of context?
So that's another topic. I'm curious to have more dialogues with people who are supportive of LGBTQ and what the reasons are. I want to know if the reasons have any merit.
Merit?
Apart from, I just prefer it.
Just prefer what? Caring about people, Matt? Like there was some stank and some spite on the way he said that. I just prefer it. Prefer what? Caring about people in general? Or are you talking about preferring the gay sex? Which one is it, Matt?
That seems going to be very strange, right? Because what you mean by merit, presumably, is whether it conforms to your Christian standards, and obviously they don't. What do you mean by merit then?
If you have any logical, coherent reason to justify your position.
Yeah, people who identify in the LGBTQ community are fellow human beings, and we should care about them because we're human beings. And hopefully, as human beings, as a species, we do our best to care for each other. We usually have 2 choices in this world: to make each other's lives a little bit better, or to contribute to making our lives a little bit worse. So that's why I care about them.
Or is it arbitrary?
It's going to be arbitrary because I take morality to be arbitrary.
So arbitrary. Okay, so it's not wrong if I come into your house and rob you.
That would be wrong for Billy. I love it when Matt does this kind of stuff, like, oh, so it's okay for me to come in and rob you. No, just because he said it was arbitrary doesn't mean he doesn't have a take on it. Here we go. Watch Matt go. Now I think Matt's going to get a little excited here because now that this has been thrown down, I think Matt's going to think that he's got Billy on the ropes.
It's going to be wrong based on my standards.
No, it's not. There is no morality for you. You just don't like it. Come on, be consistent.
Well, that's what morality is.
Oh,
yeah.
So now you know what morality is, and you can say,
oh boy. TJG, actually, Matt has an argument. I saw the video, and Matt's halo and his hammer of justice was edited out.
what it is universally.
Universally?
Yeah, you said morality is. That's what it is. You're making a universally true statement of you understanding what morality is.
Oh, I love it when these guys
morality
do that.
is just...
Morality could just be morals, or morality could be not morals, but manners, right? I think that's a quote from Stephen Fry. Morality is just manners, right? In saying that, I think it's interesting, like when you use the word "is," that's universal. So that means it definitely, it somehow definitely is that, or it certainly is that. I'm like, well, yeah, but it doesn't mean that's all that it is. Matt has got a really kind of fucked up idea about most things philosophical. Like, as far as I don't know if that makes me a moral anti-realist or not, but I tend to think that morality, basically, I mean, especially in a practical sense, in the way that morality gets applied to issues about how we treat each other, how we create governments, build societies, build networks of each other, create interpersonal relationships. It's largely pragmatic, and I think it is mostly about morality. It's about the way we feel we should treat one another, and those those conventions and those attitudes can change over time.
About what you should or shouldn't do, right?
Is it?
Is it? Yeah, that's my understanding. What else is there?
Okay, what do you base that on?
I think the dictionary, which is what I've learned. What else is there?
So I'm just asking, what are you basing it on? If you go in a dictionary, if the dictionary changes, then the definition changes, and then you would adopt that new definition?
Well, that would tell me probably the general usage in society that dictionary reflects.
Societies
Yeah.
change. Societies change. So if in 100 years something...
Yeah, and morality changes too, right? Speaking of Stephen Fry, when he was talking about this, he was saying something that I thought was interesting because it wasn't something that I'd really paid attention to, but he was talking about the terms of kind of the usage of the word moral to describe a person, just in colloquial English, or at least, in the UK. And this would probably be in the United States too. It had been around, the late Victorian era, and when you describe somebody as moral, you were basically it was almost always considered, at least according to him, the connotation in that, what that was evoking for people was sexual morality. You were moral if you had this kind of sexual, you were engaging in acts of sexual propriety. You weren't a fornicator. You weren't a philanderer. These kinds of things. You weren't an adulterer. And he's like, and then that starts to change where moral starts to. He's like, if you ask younger people now what they think you mean when you suggest that someone is a moral person, they might say somebody who's more philanthropically inclined or charitable to others, in tune with issues of the needy. And that really wasn't the preoccupation when it came to using that term to describe someone as moral, even 150, years ago. So reality changes, whether Matt wants to admit it or not. What I think is funny is that he's going after that. I think that's JJ in the bottom, who's been talking recently with the cat avatar. Matt is going to leap to the conclusion that JJ has learned everything that he can from the dictionary. The dictionary is what imposes regularity on on all language and words. It's not just a book that we use to collect those definitions and try to standardize the meanings of those words, for common usage. No, Matt's going to turn it into like, I bet JJ worships the dictionary.
Definitionally, morally changes, which is correct.
I don't know where you're going with this, Matt, but what else is there to morality? What does morality mean?
If a dictionary today says morally good, and a dictionary 100 years from now says pedophilia is morally bad, let's just say, which dictionary is correct?
I don't think dictionaries work that way.
You said you cited a definition
of what morality means.
Okay.
Not what's good or bad.
Yeah, I thought this was hilarious when I heard it. I'm like, Matt, the dictionary doesn't give you a guide as to what's good and what's bad. It just tells you what the word morality means. The definition that we're currently using, like that it's about what's good and what's bad.
Specifically.
So what is morality then?
Well, like I said, it talks about what you should and shouldn't do. That's what morality means.
And where do you should and shouldn't do? Okay, let's just go with that definition. That's what you should and shouldn't do, right?
Right. So that's what I'm saying. That I have standards of what is moral or not moral.
So do you affirm do you affirm that definition as being true, that there are things you should and shouldn't do?
Yeah, I think there are things you should do and shouldn't do. Yeah.
If you say that you have a moral system, I think he'd already answered that question.
Okay. Can you give me something you should not do?
You should not steal my pizza.
All right. Why?
Because I wouldn't like it. It would feel bad.
Okay, here's one of my more famous, I'm known for this, a famous retort for a lot of people. It stops them in their tracks, and it's brilliant, I gotta admit. Even though I'm saying about myself, it's pretty brilliant, I gotta admit. And the word, single word, retort, it's just simple. So, You don't like it. So does it have any bearing on it if it's good or bad, or right or wrong?
I've told you that I think it's good or bad.
I don't understand that. Personal preference does have something to do with good or bad, right? Like, just because it doesn't get to some kind of like this like, you know, like all gas no brakes approach to like morality, where it's like it has to be like whatever is actually ultimately good. Like, you mean preference has nothing to do with morality? Like how I feel about something, or none of that kind of conventional, you know, this kind of mundane, piddly, you know, what does Matt actually think about that, right? Like if I went to Matt's house and just walked into his kitchen and made a sandwich, right? Because I'm dirt poor, down on my luck, and I know he's a Christian, right? I need food. I know Matt's got a house with food in it. I'm going to walk in there and help myself to a sandwich, right? If that's wrong, well, why is it wrong? Can Matt give me a reason why it's wrong for you know? And anything that he tells me about, like, well, it's wrong for you to just help yourself to that because I didn't offer it to you. Shouldn't you have, as a Christian? I was hungry. You didn't feed me. Weren't you supposed to do that? Right? You could get into issues like this forever, right? I love when Christians try to pretend that because they have a faith tradition, they have the moral high ground, as if they've got it all figured out, and they don't. They don't. And all you have to do is put them in a situation where you have to apply, or even better yet, you provide them with films that give them moral, you know, provide them with some kind of moral conflict, like a good one, right? Like a really tough one where it could be all bad, or, you know, both decisions are bad and maybe both good. Gone Baby Gone would be a good example. You know, like what do you do in that case? Hopefully, I'm not spoiling the ending of that for anybody. Yeah.
Bad. And if you don't care, I mean, that's on you.
You're the one who's offering a justification for your position, saying that something is right or not based on what you want, what you prefer. You certainly are not going to say that morality is based on what people prefer, are you?
There are people that make that case. Again, Stephen Fry makes the case morality is manners, and manners is based on how we prefer to treat one another.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I
Whoever's
prefer.
that mic, can you just get us to mute the person, please?
Who, that guy who's talking to me or chewing? I prefer that you not
chewing
speak.
and like belching and like swallowing. Please just.
Yeah, I prefer that you not speak.
See, now that's bullshit right there, right? Now, Haiti made sure that this conversation was only going to be between Matt and one person at a time, right? And all Matt had to say was, well, I'm autistic, I'm on the spectrum, I can't deal with too many voices coming at me all at once, right? Okay. Now, Tom is like, okay, you know, hey, maybe mute that, you know, when we can hear you burping and chewing and swallowing and drinking. And what's Matt? Well, I prefer that you don't speak. That's kind of bitchy, Matt. I mean, if you're watching, he's not. But that's a really bitchy move, right? They should have just told him, like, you know, you know, like, oh, you know, I can't deal with multiple voices. Well, then you need to work on that. Why don't you make this part of your therapy? You know, toughen up.
I think morally you are wrong for saying everything you say that contradicts me. So am I correct?
I don't think so. No.
Also, you're not consistent with your own definition.
How am I inconsistent?
You offer your own basis of subjectivity and arbitrary position as why something is good or bad. So if I do the same thing, is it true? If it contradicts what you believe, is it true?
Is what true?
Come on. You're not obtuse. You're not being trollish now, are you?
Do you mean that
obtuse and trollish are two different things? I know, semantics. Jody, Matt, being an asshole isn't the same as being autistic. Ben Ghazi writes that I think this is important too. Matt Slick has never been diagnosed with autism. Yeah, I think that he might have some kind of, like, he might be on some kind of spectrum, but a lot of people are. A lot of people could be neurologically different, or he could just have anxiety issues. There's lots of people who have anxiety issues or not spectrum, you know, not on the spectrum, and would not be able to handle dealing with like a Clubhouse conversation. So.
Because I have my own standard, if you go by your own standard, I should agree with it? Is that what you?
Showing the incongruity of that kind of a philosophical position, that morality and truth are based upon one's opinions and preferences. Because if you hold to that, and then my opinion and my preference.
Now he's conflating morality with truth. They didn't get to that point. He just did that. Well, who said that? Did either of these guys say that morality is equivalent with truth?
My moral belief is in contradiction to yours. The question then is, are both true, even though they contradict each other?
Does morality have to be true in order to do it? Like, I would ask Matt that. Like, does it need to be, like, do you need to know the absolute foundation of whether this thing is truly good or truly bad to concede that maybe this person doesn't want you to screw with them? Or do you have to have it all laid out? And more than that, do you have to have it laid out by a divine being that threatens you with some kind of divine punishment if you fuck up?
Would you say
No,
logically?
No, if you don't agree with me, you're wrong.
Yeah, so you're saying then that truth, excuse me, moral truth, is not based upon people's opinions because they contradict each other.
What? No, they are based on people's opinions. They're based on how you feel.
And when and if you feel that a certain moral sexual act is morally right, and I say it's wrong, is it right or is it wrong?
It depends on whether or not you've worked out your safety word, Matt. Alpha K91, as a woman, most faiths insist I can't even read this book myself, but rather have it fed to me in little pieces by people like Matt. Yeah, it's like, anyway, that's an interesting point, though. In all seriousness, it would have been, and it might, and I'm sure it still is in some religions and in some Christian denominations, it is immoral to allow women to just read the Bible without the guidance of their husband or the guidance of a minister. It's immoral to do that, right? Now, what's their standard for that? I'm sure they could probably cite some scripture, right? But the vast majority of Christian denominations don't hold to that. So how do they justify not doing that? You got a Christian denomination over here. It's like, no, women shouldn't just be allowed to just with their own, their own eyeballs peer into special revelation that is the Bible. That has to come, they have to be instructed in that by the ways of their husbands or their fathers or their, ministers. And just a thought.
Again, it's subjective. And my opinion, my standard is going to be the judge. I'm going to be the judge. Now, just because you might feel that you should be the judge of what you do subjectively doesn't mean I have to agree with it. That's why it's subjective.
Right. Floyd FP, great to see you. Big fan of yours. It is quite simple. If morality is my own personal view, then anyone that thinks differently would be wrong by my own standard. Right. And this, I think somebody had mentioned that, by conflating morality with truth, Matt's already smuggling in moral realism into the whole thing. But I think this is interesting because what Floyd's doing here, like it really doesn't have to be much more complicated than that, right? Like, because Matt acts all indignant, like, are you just saying that it's wrong? Like, am I saying it's universally wrong to steal pizza, or to take pizza that maybe isn't yours? Is it universally wrong all the time in any situation, in any case? I don't know that. But I do know that from my perspective, stealing my pizza is a no-no, right? That's my own personal view. And justification for that particular view would just be your own preference. Now, is that morality with a capital M writ large and across the universe? No. But this is an issue that usually ends up happening, is people end up talking about morality past each other because Christians, it has to be that they're trying to get to, like, what do we actually have to do, right? And I think that's actually kind of the frustrating thing, right? Like, Matt's got his standards, I've got my standards. We're going to a party together, and Matt only wants to drink tequila, right? And that's the only thing that the party should serve is tequila because Matt loves tequila, right? And I don't drink, or don't drink anymore or whatever, right? So I want to have things like tea and lemonade and kombucha or whatever. Maybe not kombucha. Anyway, so we get into a dispute about this. How do we end up dealing with this, right? Like, I don't think people should be there drinking alcohol. Matt obviously wants to bring at least tequila for himself, maybe more to share with others. So what do we end up doing? We probably end up compromising on it because we do have different views about what's right in that situation. That's how people usually work those things out. Not complicated, but Matt's trying to turn this into this moral exercise of like what's ultimately right, according to the will of God. Like, okay, when it comes to preferences, I don't know that that's really that big of a deal.
Conversely, though, say your preference coincides with mine. Do you think it's now objective?
The issue here is the determining.
Can you answer that?
I said no. The answer is no.
Oh.
And so the thing is, if you want to offer the position of determining moral truth based upon a person's opinion, what do you do when opinions contradict each other?
Well, in some cases, they're not contradicting each other. They're just in disagreement. Disagreement isn't necessarily contradiction. You try to work out a compromise.
That's not a conflict for subjective morality.
I mean, it depends on what it is. I'm either I might shun you. I might, who knows?
Raping a 5-year-old girl, is it good or bad?
And here we go. It only took, we've been watching this for about 23 minutes with 9 minutes to go, 10 minutes to go, and he's already gotten into child rape. Here we go.
It's a silly question to ask. It's terrible.
No, it's not. It's not a silly question. Unfortunately, it happens, and I have to meet them in a back alley and talk to them about it in the dark. So
you ought to talk to some Baptists then, Matt. I don't know if he reads the news and has looked into some of those issues, or some Roman Catholics or some non-denominationalists. A lot of those Baptist ministers, when they released the report about the pervasive amounts of sexual assault and sexual abuse going on, what happened to most of those ministers? They just left. They just took off. Nothing really happened to them. Nobody pressed charges, and nobody in the administration really, But Matt's talking, it does happen. Yeah, it does happen. It happen, and it happens oftentimes. The perpetrator has a Bible in their hand and is teaching a kid some Bible verses. So,
is it morally right or wrong?
It's terrible.
I didn't ask if it's terrible. Is it morally right or wrong?
It's morally right and terrible. What does Matt think what does he think JJ's answering here? Floyd, it is quite simple. They are wrong and I am right based on my opinion. Now, if we share the same moral values, then we can reason that what is the best option based on our shared moral values. Right. Yeah. Not too tough. But now I think Matt is going to try to get into this because he's starting to huff and puff again, right? So he's got the moral high ground again. We're talking about kids being sexually assaulted. Never by Christians, though, only by drag queens and atheists. So we'll see what happens here.
You're wrong. Terrible. Terribly wrong.
So if another person does it 5 years later in different places, is it also morally wrong?
All things considered, still terribly wrong, yeah.
So you believe in a universal truth of morality?
Why does that have to be I don't understand this. Why does that have to be a universal truth in order for it to be moral? I mean, and it depends on the way we use moral, because oftentimes moral is just, moral, my definition is just concerned with issues of good and bad, but it often gets used to be good, right? But this idea of like universally good or universally bad, like, look, I think that we as a species normally can agree on the fact that we don't want our own kids getting harmed, and we don't want to see other people's kids getting harmed too. Now, where things get a little bit weird is that we live in a society where there are people secretly and not so secretly harming their own kids or harming other people's kids. And so, unfortunately, we have to do something about that. So those people obviously have a different moral system. The weirder ones are the ones that know they're not supposed, that know they probably shouldn't be harming kids, but they just can't help themselves. But Matt's going to simplify this down to like, well, okay, you have no problem then. You agree that the harming of kids is always wrong. Well, no, the harming of kids is not always wrong, because obviously giving a kid a painful vaccination is better than allowing that kid to eventually contract the disease, right? So in that case, I wouldn't say that's a universal truth. And I think that's what Matt's trying to do here. Harming kids is bad. Now, if he wants to make it very specific, what was his thing? Raping a kid and then 5 years, and then raping a kid that's 5 years older than that previous kid. Is that universally wrong? Well, if you're using the word rape, yeah, it kind of has to be, because that's the definition of rape. It's sexual assault. It's like saying, is murder always wrong? Yeah, because the definition of murder is an unjustifiable killing. So yeah, it's always wrong. It's sort of set up conceptually to be that.
I don't know if that's what you call that.
Because you're believing the same action in different places and different time has the logical necessity of being wrong by nature. It's a universal. So what you're saying is
maybe it is.
Thing.
It's still based on my standard, though.
Yeah, your standard is that there's a universal moral. But if it's based on your subjective experience.
Yeah, Matt is begging the question here. He's assuming that there is some objective standard. Yeah, which is, yeah, and that's really the part where I think this is the part where most Christians want to get to, right? What I find odd about this, and maybe Floyd has an opinion on this, is how closely this veers towards essentially kind of coinciding with ideas about kind of divine command theory. The idea that this objective standard essentially has to be imposed on us, right? Like you could argue until you're blue in the face about whether or not, you know, divine commands are actually super subjective or not. Very few Christians are going to believe that, but it always seems to me that, you know, right around the corner from where Matt is with this sort of like, well, you have to have a universal standard of truth. There has to be some kind of objective standard, and that objective standard is the decrees from the creator of the universe, which, you know, he won't be able to demonstrate. He'll just be able to assert, and then say, how do we know that thing made those assertions, that it made those commands? Well, because you and I agree that attacking kids, the sexual assault of kids, is wrong. Therefore, God. Like, yeah, I don't think it works that way. What's hilarious is that John Lee doesn't think Slick's conundrum is a problem. If God wills it, so be it. Yeah, exactly. And then you get somebody like John Lee who kind of, you know, blows up Matt's spot. Is it morally wrong? Is it morally wrong that if one knows a child is being raped or is about to be raped and does nothing about preventing / stopping it? Yeah, I think I actually wrote that in one of the comments during this exchange. I'm like, okay, well, if Matt's getting close to the universal truth that it's always wrong, you know, the raping of children is always wrong, what about permitting or ignoring instances of child rape?
Preferences, how then is it universal?
I'm not sure that that's what universal is, but
for it to be a universal, it would have to be in all times, in all places. But to show that JJ has the same opinion in 2 times doesn't establish that it's universal.
I grant that. So maybe JJ could try and give us an example where raping a 5-year-old. When I use the statement I use, which is a trap for the atheist, is a statement true or false? It is always morally wrong for anyone to torture babies to death merely for their personal pleasure. Is that true or false?
Do you remember?
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of a weird way of putting that, because whether that's true or false is might be separate from whether or not it's moral.
I think that's true.
So then if you say it's true, then you're saying there's a universal moral absolute.
Am I? I was just giving you my opinion.
Yeah, and that doesn't matter, right? Like, so let's say that is the truth. That you know, if you're even if you kind of a correspondence kind of thing, right? Truth is that which conforms to, you know, actual situations, actual reality, you know, states of affairs. Well, in that case, then you could say, because you can't, you know, we don't have a situation in which there is a good scenario in which a child is raped, right? So it's true that it is wrong for someone to, or in this case, he's changed it to torturing children merely for fun. Yeah, right. But consider the language he has to employ in order to get there. He's already got the motive in it. So the malice is built into this thing, right? Is that if you start getting this a little bit more vague, you start running into some moral questions. Is it always wrong to torture? Is it always wrong to torture people? Is it always wrong to torture baby people, infants? Is it always wrong to torture infants for fun? Say then you basically, I mean, you've got it so narrowed down there that they're really, I mean, but consider all the stuff that Matt logged that he built into that. It's how is that universally true? Because he's narrowed the parameters down to something that we know the victim, we know the victimizer, we know the action, we know the motive, and the motive's pure malice, so it's a no-brainer, right? But if we're talking about other universal truths, it would be like, say, killing, always wrong, go. Christians disagree on this, right? You can run into Christian pacifists, but it's always wrong to take another human life, even in defense of your own. And others are like, no, you're perfectly justified morally in defending your life or the lives of those you love and care about. Gets a little bit more difficult then.
Yeah, your opinion is that there's a universal moral absolute.
My opinion will always be that, yes.
Yeah, your opinion is it's always wrong for everyone. So your opinion is, yes, there is a moral absolute because it's always wrong for everyone to do that.
But couldn't I be wrong?
So if you believe that that is a universal moral standard, how do you get that if it's just based on your subjective opinion?
It feels really bad.
Okay. So you see the
Yeah, Matt's gonna love that. Michael, the Canadian atheist, when setting up our chat, I used his line about torturing kids against him. I told him I agree, cited my moral standard, and he didn't like that one little bit. Yeah, because if you agree with him on that, and then your standard's different, you're clear. What I think is weird about that, though, is, and I don't know if anybody's ever asked him this, right? If somebody does what Michael does, right? Hey, you've brought this up, torturing kids merely for fun. At the fun of the torture, not the fun of the kid. I guess thanks, Jay. Now I'm thinking in terms like, you need to make that even more specific. Tell him that you agree with it, and then give him the reason. Give it like Michael says. Give him your moral standard, and when he disagrees with the standard, does he then disagree that it's still wrong? Right? Like, this is the problem. Like, yeah, fine, we agree, but you're not right about that. It's the weirdest thing. It's like, I agree with you, Matt. It's like torturing babies merely for fun is always wrong, right? Well, okay, then tell me why you think that is the case. Well, I just think that it's always, as the human species, I can give a naturalistic definition of it. I can give an interpersonal one. I can appeal to social contract theory, all these other kinds of things. Matt's, nah, I don't care. Okay. Was I right when I agreed with you? Or does it not matter? Like, I always kind of wonder, like, if Matt's willing to actually play that game. Because I'd be willing to cash those chips in. Like, oh, okay. So you're giving me carte blanche to be the nihilist you think that I am. Is that really how you think society is going to, how it's going to work things out? Because that's not how things work out. Like, and I don't get this also this idea that, like, well, Matt can reach these conclusions about the nature of universal truths based on the fact that we all agree that something like this, like the torturing of babies for fun, merely for fun, as he puts it, is always bad. Therefore, God, right? You can't work that out from God. You can't say, oh, there's a God, and that's why the torture of infants merely for fun is always wrong. That doesn't make sense. You'd need something more universal. Mistreating humans is always wrong, right? That's more of a universal truth. That might be something more inclined with what God wants. But something that narrowly prescribed, torturing infants just for your own giggles is always bad. Cool. And because we know that to be universally true, there's a God. Yeah, I don't think so. How did you get there? How did you demonstrate that? Well, now we know that there's a God because we know that's universal truth, and because it's universal truth, that's how we know that there's a God. And because there's and that's the only way we could have ever reached that conclusion. So it's perfectly acceptable for Matt to draw an inference from this kind of moral example of what he believes is a universal truth, and then conclude God, or use that as evidence, like, this is how we know that there is a God. But it's not okay for somebody else to work that exercise out in reverse, right? Like, no, I think that this is how we generally have lots of different ideas about what's right and wrong and different preferences, but as social animals, we work those things out. We make compromises, and we try to work together, and we come up with shared principles. Shared principles like, we should be kind to each other. We should take care of each other. We should, at the very least, we should seek to do as little harm to one another as possible. These kinds of things. We establish those boundaries. Right. Matt doesn't think that we can do that. That's wrong. That just leads to chaos. But it's totally okay to infer the existence of a God from the example, babies should not, it's always wrong to torture a baby for fun. I don't get this. I don't understand how he thinks that works. And then ask if torturing the baby leads to an ultimate good. Yeah, you could do that. But then again, you'd also have to say, like, okay, well, the torturing of a child merely for fun is always wrong. But what if what does it say about a God that allows that child? Because Matt has gotten really worked up in other conversations where he's used this favorite example of his and been like, well, there are situations where there have been these horrible people that have tortured children just for fun. Right. And in your world, God allowed that. So if it's always wrong to torture a baby for fun, in all cases, that's a universal truth according to Matt Slick. What if you add on that component? It is always wrong to allow the torture of infants for fun. That would be a universal moral that you'd have to apply to God. Matt's not going to allow that. He's not going to want that.
Incoherence of your position, trying to show it to you. And this often happens when I get atheists this far, is no offense meant, but they just basically go in circles. They can't go very far.
I don't know where else I need to go.
To the truth.
No, I mean, what's incoherent about it?
Do you believe in universal moral absolutes?
No, and neither does Matt. Because if Matt believed in universal absolutes, then he should have no problem with someone asking him, is it always wrong to allow for the torture of infants merely for fun? Because if that's happened in this world, his God has allowed it.
I might.
Are you an atheist?
But it depends on what we're talking about. It seems like there must be, though, and that is that I will always feel that way about it.
Yes, I'm going to try and set you up. Okay, you ready?
And no, Matt, I'm a pantheist.
Oh, you're a pantheist. Okay.
Oh no! Don't tell him that.
That has its own set of problems.
Oh God! No, watch this. Just this is going to be one of those. I'd forgotten about this part.
Like what? Like what?
Pantheism says God and the universe are one and the same thing, but the universe came into existence, which means your God came into existence. But how's that possible from a pantheistic worldview?
What Matt just burped up at him right there was something from some of his goofy theology. So since this guy says JJ is claiming that he's a pantheist, or actually, is this Jack talking? I think this is.
It's not really.
No, I think it is JJ still talking. JJ's now saying that he's a pantheist. Well, okay, well, if you're a pantheist according to my theology, you can't be. Neat, Matt. Thumbs up. What the fuck? I mean, that's really no different than. I mean, if JJ had said that he was like a Sikh or a Jain, right? Matt would have just probably got dipped into some Christian theology, explaining like, well, this is why Sikhism or Jainism is false. Cool.
Known that the universe came into existence or not.
Yeah, logic requires it, and the evidence requires it.
I don't think so. But that's another discussion.
Yeah, we could discuss it.
How do pantheism works in mysterious ways?
Michael writes, silly boy, his ways are higher than ours. He has a perfectly morally justifiable reason. And Matt is a Calvinist. It's just because God reasons. Yeah. But oh yeah. I've only had a conversation with Matt Slick one time, and it was for like 10 minutes during my lunch break. One of these days I wouldn't mind having a longer conversation with him, but hopefully he's not being quite as worked up as this one. Although now he's calmed down. At this point in the conversation, he's cooling off. But some of those other ones, oh, I hope you never gain power. Oh God, like what the fuck? Like you're the one bringing up these fake ass problems in the world. Like you know that they're roaming from school to school, telling your kindergartner how to not only telling them that it's okay to have gay sex, but telling them how to have the gay sex. Like no, Matt, that's not a thing. Turn off Fox News. Shake yourself, a little bit. Smack yourself a couple times in the face. Go for a walk. Deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth.
Yeah, when you're a pantheist, you can say all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, you can. I wonder what the God of pantheism would do on a quantum level.
Well, some pantheists might actually just say that that pantheism is the God of pantheism is kind of the quantum level, or at least that's what it is at fundamental level. And then there's the emergent properties of the pantheistic universe, which might include some kind of universal consciousness. But I want that on a shirt. When you're a pantheist, you can say all sorts of crazy stuff. Like I think that's a good life lesson right there.
If he's coherent.
Do you want to
Quantum dominoes backwards on Wednesday.
Yeah. I like to say blue sleeps faster than Wednesday. That's what happens in the pantheistic quantum.
No, it doesn't.
Douchebag 9mm.
Douchebag 9mm.
That all might be coherent to God. It's not to me. I'm a mere mortal.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that Matt brings that up. Like, oh, well, all this crazy random stuff happens. Well, yeah, but wouldn't a God know what that means? The God that you're talking about with that kind of consciousness, that all-knowing, would know about any of it. Like, it might be completely random for us. Like, we can't even figure out the whole light as a particle and a wave kind of thing, right? That's like blowing our tiny minds. But you got a God that's got that on lock, right? So
anyway, I got about 4 minutes. I've enjoyed this. I do want to know why people want to support LGBTQ, what the reason is.
Yeah. So here's what I'm going to say about that, because he's finally getting to the point. Floyd, I was in a long negotiation with Matt to have a debate, but he stopped responding. I wonder why. Yeah, I would like to see that. I would like to see a debate between Floyd, FP, and Matt. If you do communicate with him again, Floyd, let him know. I would be more than happy to set that up. I don't think Matt would trust me as an unbiased moderator, but I would do that. But yeah, this part here where he's talking about, like, I don't understand.
The best reason I've gotten so far, the best, is because it's an arbitrary subjective desire.
The reason I support religious freedom.
Yeah.
Support my religious freedom to condemn LGBTQ as sinful.
Yeah, I think it's rude,
right.
But
I believe it's sinful. I do.
It was going to be on Steve McRae's channel. Huh. I wonder why I backed out. Maybe he thought that you and Steve McRae were going to gang up on him or something. Who knows? So yeah, my final thoughts on this, because he's going to get into a goofy ass thing here, because he's still struggling. Why would people support the LGBTQ community? Probably because they are that. Well, the first reason that you would support the community probably is because you are a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, right? Especially if you have somebody in your life who is, gay, trans, queer, bi, whatever. And you don't want them to, you want them to be able to have a happy and enriching life, at least as happy and as enriching as they can hopefully make it. And you don't want them to be held back by that basic fact. Matt disagrees with this. Matt has reasons for not only, and I think this is dishonest, his question, why do you care about this group, right? Matt not only doesn't care about this group, but probably thinks deep down that they should be punished, right? Or at the very least, they must be converted, right? They have to change their ways. We certainly can't just let them do whatever they want, and we sure as hell shouldn't have shows that celebrate their lives or even really depict their lives. I mean, just scratch the whole idea of like quoting it a celebration or being proud of them or doing any of this kind of stuff. Like, if Matt had his way, you would not, it would be wrong for TV shows or movies to feature gay parents, same-sex couples, married or together, right? Merely together. Those would be unacceptable influences on society. He'd use the kids, right? But really, he doesn't even want adults. He doesn't want it normalized in any sense, right? So this is why I think it's dishonest, a little bit dishonest of them to try to bring up the kid thing, to try to sneak in this whole gay panic kind of crap. Oh, they're there to groom your kids. Fuck off. No, I'm like you could make that assumption about anybody that comes in the name of Jesus. Like if somebody shows up at your door and says, hey, have you ever heard about Jesus? Would you like to talk about Jesus? Just assume that person is interested in your kids sexually, right? Because the statistics unfortunately kind of bear that out, at least more for that group than they do for people in the LGBTQ community, right? Would that be unfair? Absolutely. So why is Matt doing this with these members? Because the Bible has informed him that these people are just, inherently immoral. But here's the real problem, and I'll probably end with this here. The reason that I think, especially evangelical Christians in the United States, get so bent out of shape over this issue is because homosexuality proves that there's no Holy Spirit. That's fundamentally what's at odds here, right? Because you have really the Christian church in the United States is divided between these two kinds of takes, right? One is to condemn it and to not allow it in their midst because it's a sinful practice, and if you're going to be with us, then you're going to have to disavow it, right? You can't be a quote practicing homosexual, their term. That can't happen. You can't do that anymore. So you're going to have to live a lie and suppress those urges if you want to be in our little group, right? And then there's the other Christian groups, and it's probably, I don't know if they're growing or not. Christianity in general is shrinking, but where they tend to be a lot more liberal about this, right? They accept notions of notions on gender and sex, so they're not dismissive of trans issues. They're accepting of them. They accept notions of sexual orientation, so they don't automatically assume that somebody who is has a different sexual orientation is automatically a predator. So they accept them. They accept the fact they even perform weddings for them, or even allow them to become members of the ministry. The problem with that is that particular group has to deal with the notion that some of these Bible verses that the fundamentalists have grounded this moralizing stance on, they're wrong, right? Or at the very least, they're unimportant, right? I think it's easier for those particular groups to kind of work around that, especially if they tend to have a little bit more of an open or even a scholarly take on those books, right? They could believe that they're divinely inspired, but they're going to say, yeah, there's different cultural baggage and mistakes and human weakness and stuff riddled throughout the books of the Bible, right? And you have to take the good with the bad, right? But for a fundamentalist, you can't square that, right? Everything in the Bible has to be true. And so if you can't give that up, then you have to, for the sake of the book, you have to be willing to throw a bunch of your fellow human beings under the bus, which unfortunately far too many of them are willing to do. The issue there, though, is how do you then reconcile how you treat these people once they're in your midst? Well, if they're being think about this for a second, and I hope I haven't bored anybody too much. I've lost some viewers on this one, but think about it this way, and then I'll probably play the rest of this video out so we can see his goofy story. There's plenty of testimony from Christians where they talk about their conversion experience, right? And they'll talk about what their life was like before they were a believer. And I've heard this from especially from guys. They'll talk about how they'd get drunk and get into fights, problems with drugs, separated from their wife, separated from their kids because they were monstrous, prone to all manner of violent outbursts and spite and hatred and bigotry and all these kinds of things. But then, something happened. They hit rock bottom, a variety of different things. They find the Lord and their heart is changed. And now they're not only do they not drink and fight and smoke and swear and beat up people at the bar every Saturday night and go off horn and all this kind of stuff, they're not even inclined to. That's the trick. The Holy Spirit has changed their heart. They don't even want to do those things anymore, right? And the reason why I think these liberal churches are kind of like a thorn for the more conservative ones is because the conservative ones want to be able to tell, if homosexuality is the equivalent to alcoholism and violence and all these other kinds of problems that can be cured with the Holy Spirit, then it stands to reason that homosexuality in the Christian community should not be a thing. But it is. It never goes away. The Holy Spirit never goes away. Homosexual Christians are a perfect example of why the Holy Spirit is probably not true. It's probably not real, because it should be changing their heart so that orientation is shifted. I'm sure that there are people out there that think that is that may have happened to them, but my guess would be that it's very, very rare, exceedingly rare. And what we're seeing with Christians, liberal churches, is that they're just willing to accept that people in there. But I still think that they have to kind of contend with this issue. Their side of things is easier because they're just like, no, this is part of being part of the human race, and the Bible doesn't have to be taken literally. That's how they reconcile that issue and square that. I think they have a more humane and charitable way of dealing with that. But for Christians like Matt, no. And the reason that I think homosexuality, I mean, outside of trying to psychologize and say that these guys are, they're closeted homosexuals, that's where their homophobia is coming from, that could be a point. There could be a point to that. But for what motivates Christians, what provides them with a lot of anxiety, is that the Holy Spirit is not transforming these people's sexual orientations, and that's a problem. And it's a painful reminder to them, I think, that this doesn't go away. Because when they have Christians in their midst, and they do have, that this does happen quite a bit, where you have someone who is wrestling with orientation and their belief in Christianity, and all they're being told that they can act on those feelings, they just need to suppress it, right? And if they're promised this notion that they're gonna, it's just gonna go away, trust in God, He will transform you, He doesn't. More and more people, I think, figure that out after a while. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't, and the results can be tragic when they can't reconcile that difference, and they get really desperate. So,
I believe it's morally wrong to teach sexuality to kindergartners.
Oh, Matt, can you tell us the one story before you go about how, like, your daughter had like a friend over and they were like trans, and then like you convinced them?
No, you got about a 10 to 4 minutes, right?
What?
So one of my daughters, she's a model, and everywhere she goes, people go, "Hey, you're so and so," and she's pretty and all that stuff, blah blah blah. Okay, so she's also very open-hearted, and she meets a lot of people. And so around Christmas, a couple of years ago, she calls up. She's not living here with us. She's empty nesters here. She calls up, and goes, "Hey, Mom, Dad, come over for Christmas for the night?" I go, "Sure, yeah, of course." Get up in the morning and open presents. She goes, "But I know something's up." I go, "Yeah." Well, she goes, I met this new friend and just moved into the area, and I said, "This guy or girl?" She says, "Girl." I said, "Bring her over." Well, I said, I'm laughing. I go, "What?" "Well, she's in transition to becoming a guy." And I said, "Okay, bring her over." I said, "Let me go talk to Mom." Talk to Mom. My wife, call her Mom. I'm going to talk to the kids. And she goes, "Yeah, bring her over." I said, "I call my daughter." I tell me, "Yeah, no problem." "Are you serious?" "Yeah, no problem. Why?" So she comes over. Her name's Mars, Mars. It's short for something. And what my wife and I did was we confiscated one of the presents from somebody, and we just
that's why I sped it up, Chatterhouse. I'm just gonna blitz through this as quickly as I can here.
wrapped it for her so that she'd feel welcome. She's transitioned to a guy, but I call her a girl. And so I don't know if she spent the night. I think she did. And she came over the night before, and we treated her great. We didn't say anything. She doesn't know what I do for a living. Nothing. And we just treated her really great. Jump all over her and say all this stuff. Next day, she gets up, and we all have breakfast, and she is loving it. And we, presents. We said, "Look, this is for you." I said, "They go, what? You can't give me a present?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." And we, she opened it, had a great time. And then she said later that she wanted to go do some errands and come back. And I said, "That's fine, come back." And she goes, "You guys are great." I said, "Yeah, thanks." She came back a few hours later, and everybody's wondering what Matt Slick is going to say, the Christian apologist. Paul. She comes back a few hours later, and we're all having fun and having dinner, and people are enjoying their gifts. And I said, "Hey, Mars, I got a question." And the room went dead quiet. My daughters were there, wife's there, friends are there. Mars looks at me, and I asked her a question. I said, "Why Mars? Why not Jupiter or Saturn?" And she loved that. She loved it. And I started making stupid jokes because she said she had to go someplace. I go, "Well, when you return, will that be from the perihelion or aphelion?" All these stupid planet jokes and solar system jokes. And she had a great time. I didn't say a thing to her about our Lord and about her confusion. About a month later, she was over.
Her
Feeling
confusion.
very comfortable here. And when the conversation was right, I said, "So do you know what I do for a living?" And she said, "No." And I told her. She said, "Really?" So I talked about the things of the Lord and what's good and bad and right and wrong, revealed from Him. I left it wide open. And she's been back. She feels comfortable here. I don't approve of this. Oh, and she's transitioning back to being a girl. So.
Yeah, that didn't happen. I'm sorry. She's transitioning back to being a girl. Okay. So I don't think Matt understands something here. So one of the things that can happen during gender reassignment is that now, especially now, I think the protocol now is that if you are looking into that, if you've gone past the stage of kind of questioning, but you're really looking into it, you feel like this is a direction you need to go. Normally, I think the protocol is 2 years of therapy, of counseling, where you discuss your options with a counselor. You go through, they really get to know you. They work through this, and they're an advocate for this position, for whichever decision you make, whichever way you decide to go. But the idea behind that is to work through different issues to make sure that this isn't something that, to really ground that your motivations for making this change are based on the fact that this is how you identify, and it's not. It may not be these other issues that might be clouding it, right? So, and I think that's become kind of the standard, is anywhere from 18 months to 24 months of counseling on it before you get to the stage where you begin to do the transitioning part. So it's pretty common for people to say that somebody is in counseling, they're transitioning. I think that's actually becoming a thing. I don't know. Well, for Matt to talk about this kind of thing, it's also not uncommon for people to be getting counseling for gender dysphoria, and who, and as soon as people hear that, they're like, oh, so you're thinking about getting the surgery to become the opposite sex? Like, no, that doesn't have anything to do with it, right? They're in counseling for either gender dysphoria or these other issues to rule these kinds of things out, right? So they're working through that. They may not make a full transition. That may not ever happen for them. They may not pursue the surgical aspects, the physical changes, or any of that other kind of stuff. So the way Matt's even talking about this, it's like, like, oh, now she's transitioning back. Like, okay, how is she growing her hair out longer, or did she like I have questions about this, but I mean, it's one of those things too, because I can see Marty Cameo's in the. By the way, hi Marty. She's in there getting kind of pretty offended at Matt's comments. I would say, like, yeah, it's bad that he's misgendering this girl, but I'm pretty sure she's completely hypothetical. So I mean, it's still bad, but this is not a real person he's inflicting this on.
Matt, do you mind if I ask a couple questions before you go? I know you want to go.
Game over.
Okay, yeah, that's it. So yeah, so anyway, that's what I wanted to. Sorry, folks, if this one's a little bit more, this one's a little bit slower paced than some of my other ones. But yeah, Matt's like talking about anything having to do with LGBTQ usually always kicks up a little bit of dopamine in my brain. So I kind of wanted to, talk about that one a little bit. But I've been on for 2 hours, so it's time to finish this one. And I will be back to review another video probably a couple of days here. So I hope those of you who caught this live, I hope you liked it. Like, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff, whatever. Hope leave comments. Got any questions or concerns or anything like that, or just want to yell at me, jeffersonspatchcock@gmail.com. So I hope you guys all take care of yourselves and have a great night. See you later.